Whenever I get a client and when they want to send me songs to be mixed and mastered, they always have this doubt. And that is, how should they export their stems? Should they do any particular settings or should they remove all the plugins that they've added? Should they have a balance in volume or should it be completely raw? And every client has the same doubt over and over again. So I thought I'd make this video to clearly show everybody how they need to export their stems before sending it to a mixing engineer. We'll be going through it step by step on what to do and what to not do. So stick around, follow this video and write notes if you want. I'm Florina Jain, otherwise known as Flow of Music. If you like music production related tutorials, then don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get into the video. Now to give a little bit of context, whenever someone begins to program their song, they always add all these reverb effects, delay effects, a lot of VST. Sometimes they may not be a mix engineer themselves, but they'll be doing a lot of stuff just so that they have a feel of how the song is heading towards. But when you send it to a mixing engineer is going to take care of all those effects and all those processes. So if you already add those effects and send it to them, it may be difficult for them to, work around with that. So we're going to talk about what and all you can do before sending it to the mixing engineer. Basically, it'll be nice if the mixing engineer has a completely clean slate to start with, meaning you only have tracks. You did not add any effects to it. So on that point, let's move on to the first section. First section is to remove all plugins that you've added on your track. You may have added reverb or delay, little bit of compression, little bit of reverb just to have an idea of how the track is heading towards. But then when you send it to the mixing engineer is now going to focus on details. And if you've already, let's say, cut a lot of mid-frequency, but then engineer has to work with mid-frequency, that engineer cannot magically make those mids appear, right? What you cut and send it to that engineer, it's cut. So you cannot bring it back. So first of all, remove all the effects plugin that you've applied. I'm not talking about the VST. Of course, you'll have the VST on. But then remove any other effect plugin, EQ, compressor, reverb, delay, saturation, any other effect, any other thing that you've added in your channel strip, completely turn them off. Double check on all the tracks, on the groups, even on the stereo. Sometimes you might have added a compressor or something. Just turn all those effects off. The next point is to pay attention to any automation that you've done. It's very common that we'll do some automation on a synth track. For example, you wanted to slowly open up, or you've done a weird automation where you have some track, have a different tone coming back to this. So you have to remove automation, but not all automations. For example, if you've done an automation on a plugin, or if you've done automation in terms of volume, the volume fader, you've done an automation, it's best to remove those automations unless it is a very crucial thing. If you have one section really soft, one section very loud, and you felt like you want to have some automation and pull the softer section up, maybe that's okay to do it. And that's okay to send to the engineer. But suppose you're doing a lot of minute automations. Every section you're changing the volume or the panning and all that. If it's a very critical part, it's better to leave that part to the engineer. And you can convey what you want the track to sound like to the engineer rather than you doing it. Because if you do it, the engineer will no longer have control on the track. What you did stays like that. So that's why if it is a very crucial element and you think the song needs to have that change, you're pretty sure about that change, then it's okay to leave it like that. But if you're just playing with the track and you're just trying it to sound like something, so you did some changes through automation, but you're not quite sure if you want it that way, if you want it to be improved, you're not having an idea on that, it's better you turn off all those automations, remove all those automations and then send it to the engineer. You can convey your idea to the engineer and the engineer can make it come alive. Rather than not having any ability to work with the track, it's better you give that flexibility to the engineer. Third point is making sure your levels are right. Number one, when you have audio tracks, did you record it with proper gain staging? Is your gain levels too high or too low? Suppose you are recording and you feel like the gains are really low, just fix it there itself. Don't make the engineer fix your errors, okay? It's your art. It's not a place where you can fix everything by giving a broken element, right? So just try to pay attention to all the gain levels in your interface and the gain levels in every audio track. If you don't know what gain staging means, I've attached a video on this page. Just click that and have a look at that video and you will be able to understand what gain staging means. So apart from the basic gain levels, also look at the MIDI levels. You can't give a MIDI level that's like so high in terms of volume and it's distorting, right? So have a right level. What I would suggest is not allowing any fader to go beyond that 0 dB mark, that's a good balance to keep, because the more you push your volume, the more prone it is to get distorted and clipped, right? So just make sure your track is somewhere below that, but also sounding balanced. And also have a look at the stereo out. That's the place where all the volume comes and merges, right? All the track output is going to come and merge. When you export and give it to the mixing engineer, but you blast the volume so high that the stereo out itself is so high, that means there is an issue somewhere. So you need to balance and make sure that the stereo out volume doesn't go too high. Yes, you're only sending out stems, but it's also a good practice to make sure that nothing, even the stereo, doesn't go too hot. Because if you want to be good in music, then you need to make sure the levels are nice. You can't give a level that's just, bang on loud and you make the engineer fix all those errors. So pay attention to all your levels and make sure nothing goes to that red zone, nothing gets clipped, everything is gain staged correctly and it's in the right level. Fourth point is cycling properly. I've seen a lot of my clients cycle right where the song starts and exactly where the MIDI note ends, and they just export that. Now the problem with this, suppose you are having a pad sound, maybe the sustain on the pad, even after you stop playing, it may sustain for a while, right? But then you cycled it in a way where only it's there up till the MIDI region only, and you did not extend till where it was sustained. Therefore, that sustain is just abruptly cut. So when you send that to the engineer, it's going to sound weird. So the engineer has to make up some plugins and kind of replicate that sustained sound just to make sure that it doesn't sound abrupt. Instead of doing all those things, it's better you cycle it right. What I would suggest, leave a bar gap in the starting. Before your song starts, a bar gap will do. When your song ends, just play a bar before and see where the sustain of every MIDI note or whatever effect you added, where does it end? Just let the track play till you feel the track completely comes to a stop. Cycle it from that start to this end. If you completely cut it or if you make the song start so abruptly, it's going to be so hard for the engineer to just manipulate those sustains. And if there's a start with a pop sound, usually that happens when you exactly started when the MIDI note starts. So rectifying all that, instead of that, if you give a nice and a correct start and end to your track, it's going to make the process more easy. Another one is exporting your stems with proper names. I had a scenario where I had about 30 to 40 tracks, everything named the same way. Like for example, let's say it's song. So it was named as song 1, song 1, song 1, song 1, song 1. It was not named based on the instruments or based on the vocals, nothing. It just had these continuous names. It's going to take extra time for the engineer to sit and organize and listen to what each track is, rename it, and why? You just make the process easier. Make sure that before you export it, rename every track. If it is drums and you have a set of tracks inside it, name it properly, like hi-hat, overheads 1, overheads 2, tom 1, tom 2, floor tom, string 1, string 2, like that. Just rename it in the right way. If you have a track that's having this weird sound but you don't really know what instrument that is, name it according to what it sounds like to you. Like a wobble guitar sound. That's it. It's going to help the engineer a lot and they can quickly organize their tracks before mixing. Otherwise, it's going to take extra time and it may delay the process of submission to the client. So it's better you completely name your tracks before you export. And on that line, you need to export each track. When you submit it to a mixing engineer and you have a category called drums, but inside drums, you have, like I said, hi-hat, overheads, kick, snare, toms and all that. The engineer will need all these individual stems. This is called as stems. If you just consolidate and send one track called as drums, the engineer will not have a lot of flexibility to work with it. So you need to export all individual stems, not the entire track. The next point, if you want to have a proper balance in terms of volume and in terms of where the instrument needs to be panned, you have an idea about it. So you've already balanced a little bit in terms of volume faders and panning, and you want it to be that way, it's okay to export it in that volume and in that pan and send it to the engineer. At least that's what I feel. Because if you are sure you don't know how to balance it, then you can keep everything in the same volume and send it to the engineer. But if you have a little bit of knowledge and you want the drums to be in this volume, the strings to be in another volume, and you've balanced it out that way, and you're sure about the balance, you are letting the engineer maybe change like 1 dB, 2 dB max. Otherwise, you like the balance of it. It's okay to export it like that. But don't forget to mention that you have balanced a little bit to the engineer. Similarly, in terms of panning, you want guitar 1 on the left side, guitar 2 on the right side. You can pan it, but also mention it in the name of that track, like guitar R, guitar L. So that the engineer knows, okay, this needs to be going on the left side, on the right side. Make everything very clear so that there's no problem or there's no confusion between you and the engineer. The next point is the most crucial point. But before that, if you are new in this channel, don't forget to subscribe, because I'm working on a mixing course for beginners and intermediates also, which will really cater to the fundamentals of EQs, compressors, and every other plugin that every beginner must know. We'll go through the fundamental knowledge of everything, and the course will be out in a couple of days. So don't forget to subscribe and have a look at my channel for updates, and we'll continue with the next topic. So the next one, mentioning the following things to your engineer: sample rate, bit depth, key, time signature, and tempo of your song. So sample rate and bit depth, these two are technical terms which basically signify the quality with which you recorded your tracks. There are some settings that you keep in your DAW, and based on that, there's a signal conversion which happens from analog to digital. It happens based on these things. Now you can't change these settings between recording, mixing, and mastering. It should remain the same. So therefore, you need to tell about these two settings to your engineer. Similarly, when it comes to the song, the engineer has to know what key, tempo, and time signature the song is in, because, for example, if they have to use a little bit of auto-tune, they need to know the key. Similarly, if there's a tempo error and they have to fix it, they need to know the tempo, right? Some of the plugins are even aligned to tempo and they give effects based on the tempo. So all these information has to be given to the engineer. Moving on to the next point is giving a reference track to the engineer. Now, reference tracks are nothing but tracks which you want your song to sound similar to, or which may justify the processing and you want your song to deliver that as well. Giving that track to the engineer based on whether it's a YouTube link, Spotify link, or if it's a track you've done earlier, anything is fine. But any reference track which will guide the engineer as to how the song has to sound like. That will help the engineer do processes that will finally lead to that goal. And finally, if you have any other details, for example, you want the whole drum set to be quite louder than the guitars, or you want the background vocals to be more spread across to the left and right, maybe you want more reverb on the violins, specify all those things to the engineer. Give a clear idea about how you want your song to sound like. Do you want the mix to be more punchy? Do you want it to be more laid back and subtle? Or do you want to make it more groovy? So based on that, the processing will differ. So give all those details, give whatever ideas you have to the engineer, and what I would suggest is give a little bit of freedom to your engineer as well. Yes, they will obviously respect your ideas and they'll take it into consideration, but because they know a lot of technical aspects as well, they might have better ideas. So consider their options as well. Have a look at the option they made with your recommendations and also one they feel will sound better. Have a look at all these things, and in the end, it's your choice because it's your song. So you can decide which one sounds nice and take that up. So those are the different points you need to keep in mind before you export and submit your stems to the engineer for mixing and mastering. I hope this video was clear. And if you want to know exactly how you need to export a mixing project and submit it to a mastering engineer for mastering, just comment that below and I'll make a video on that. This is Florina Jane, otherwise known as Flow of Music. Never stop learning, keep making music, and I'll see you guys in another video.